Good evening. If you're a trade unionist, you have just put $1.5 million of your money into a campaign to battle against Mulroney's free trade project, now in some kind of trouble, with the United States. Tonight on the program, I'm going to interview Shirley Carr, the president of the CLC, on that. Now, here's Steve with the rest of tonight's rundown.
What did the Prime Minister really say to the Vancouver Sun? Is he for drug testing or against it? The managing editor of the Sun has no doubt, and Gordon Fisher is here to explain. Also tonight, what's happening on the New York Stock Exchange? Is another crash on the horizon? In the studio with Webster, financial analyst Myron Kandel. And the Canadian Labour Congress declares war on free trade. Is our Prime Minister selling out to Ronald Reagan? Tonight from Nanaimo, Shirley Carr, president of the CLC.
Shirley Carr, all of a sudden, Prime Minister Mulroney, who at the weekend wouldn't talk about cancelling the free trade talks, is now telling people that the US has poisoned the deck and that the Americans don't want a deal. What do you think has happened on free trade?
I think he's found himself in trouble. I think that he's now on the downside of his activities relative to his desire for free trade with the United States. I think he's in political difficulties right now, and he knows it.
Well, you started a campaign yesterday with Louis Laberge and yourself and all the CLC.
That's right.
Denouncing the free trade. Maybe you had something to do with it.
Well, I think we've had something to do with it over the past year, because we have been the only organization that has actively campaigned across Canada and to go into the small communities and let the small communities know exactly what's going to happen to them.
But
and
why
I think
are you
they
against free trade? Why are you against it? Because Mr. Mulroney tells me that we're the only country in the world that hasn't got a good access to hundreds of millions of people, and without free trade, he said earlier, we're going to be in real trouble.
Well, he's being ridiculous on that. The United States has always been our largest trading partner. We've always had very good trading partners around the world. The labor movement has always been in a position to support free trade, but we would like to deal with it through GATT negotiations, where we can trade with all countries and not just have everything for the United States.
Could it be that you're just trying to protect all the old-fashioned jobs in Ontario and Quebec where most of your members are employed?
That's totally untrue, Jack, and you know it. It's totally untrue. We have every province across this country and every job across this country is at stake. But even more important than that, every political decision is at stake. The economic decisions of this country are being made offshore because we're so foreign-owned already. So what's left? The other important point that we're trying to say to Canadians is your culture is at stake, both languages are at stake, and also the sovereignty of this nation is at stake. And I think that's what's getting to Canadians. They want to stay Canadian.
You think that free trade, if it went the way Mulroney originally envisaged it, after singing When Irish Eyes Are Smiling with Reagan, would take away our sovereignty?
I'm absolutely convinced of that. All you have to do is watch what's happening. Every time Ronnie Reagan says something or does something with his wife, we see the Prime Minister of Canada and his wife on TV doing exactly the same thing.
Oh, including drug testing, perhaps?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I think he has to now find an out. And maybe he's going to go that route, but I suggest to you that that's going to create a problem for him also by coming out with a statement like that.
Well, what do you think is the secret agenda of the Americans? Do you really think they want to tell us to wipe out our Medicare as a subsidy, to wipe out our social safety nets as a subsidy? Do you think that is their secret agenda?
The multinationals and the mega multinationals are not happy with the fact that Canada does have safeguards for the people of Canada, such as our Medicare programs and such as our Social Security programs, such as our pension programs. They're not happy with that at all, and they certainly, in fact, want those on the table so that they themselves can get rid of them. They don't have those kind of things in the United States, and all you have to do is go down there and talk to the American people. And the thing I want to say to you, Jack, it's not a fight between Canadian people and American people. It's not a fight against Canadian Unionists and American Unionists. This is a battle between two governments, two leaders of two governments that are trying to take away from one country and give it to another, one that is already too big or big enough that can take care of itself, and the other one that is still trying to build, and that's Canada, and we're not about to let them do that.
But surely you don't suggest that the Mulroney is that stupid, that he is kind of a secret American supporter in trying to destroy this country. He must have at least pure motives.
Well, you have seen him operate, and I would not call him any names because I'm not supposed to do that to the leader of the country. But let me suggest to you that somebody's advising him wrong.
Well, you're not calling him any names, but you'd probably prefer to see Trudeau back again instead of Mulroney if Trudeau were to reappear.
I don't want Trudeau to reappear. I want Ed Broadbent to be the leader of this country, so don't get me into that battle. But let me suggest to you that somebody has steered this government in the wrong direction. Whether that was the Prime Minister himself that did that, or those political advisors around him, or that massive majority that he has in the House. They have not taken care of Canada in the last 2.5 years.
Look, there's something else I want you to perhaps get excited about. There's a trend appearing in this country right now, whereas the big employers are saying, take a $5 pay cut or we'll close the plant. How much is that happening across Canada?
We're seeing those kind of situations across Canada more often than not now, and I think that that is very bad for Canada as a nation. It's very bad for employers to try to get into that syndrome. And they're in the same syndrome as the American employers are in for wage cutbacks and rollbacks and takeaways. And I think that's why we've got some major strikes in this country, which are creating some very severe difficulties for the workforce and the communities there.
It's still said by many middle-of-the-road people that one of Canada's greatest problems are the incredibly good wages and conditions obtained in the good days by your unions, and that we must give up some of our living standards and wages and fringe benefits if we're going to survive. We're told that again and again, and maybe there's some truth in it.
I don't believe that. If I could see some of these employers thinking along those lines and standing and walking on picket lines with us, they would have a different tune. They don't want to give up their standard of living, and I'm sure that the employers in British Columbia certainly don't want to give up their standard of living that the labour movement has helped them to gain.
Well, the Gaynor strike is over and done with, more or less, isn't it? Isn't that the case where wages will be successfully cut and that eventually the union will be smashed?
It's not over and done with as far as we're concerned. We had our Executive Council meeting this past week, and we're out now to totally support not only the Gaynor strike, but the IWA strike, the strike of the energy chemical workers up in the north, the National Union of Provincial Government Employee strike in Newfoundland. We're not going to sit back and watch what's happening, and we're not going to sit back and watch the police, the activities of the RCMP, the activities of the provincial police, and the activities of the local police battering our people the way they are. These people are citizens, and they're standing out there because they want to maintain their jobs.
Which has been the worst one, Gaynors or NAP, the one in Newfoundland? Which has been the worst from a point of view of police brutality?
I don't think, I think both of them are as bad as each other. We have people in jail down in Newfoundland. The negotiators are in jail down there. We have people that are in hospitals in the Gaynor, so if you want to talk about injury, serious injury, we can talk about the Gaynor strike as being the worst. But then we have the police brutalities on the picket lines here in British Columbia. I don't know where it's going, and somebody is telling them to get on those picket lines and disrupt the picket line, which is a normal process that we go through.
Well, the IWA is in a bit of a mess here now with its half strike, half on, half off, and very fearful about the countervailing duty. What should Mulroney do if he listened to you and Louis Laberge? Walk right out of the free trade negotiations now because of what's happening to British Columbia on the countervail, perhaps?
Mulroney should get out of that free trade discussion that he's into. The money that he pays Simon Reisman and that crowd would be sufficient to show some good faith to put it somewhere else. But when Wilson comes out with his whatever he's coming out with this week, he should start putting money on the table to get Canadians back to work. And there's many ways he can do that.
Well, expenditure of public monies, borrow.
No, come on now. They've got a deficit that they play with. And we have suggested to them as a labour movement on behalf of Canadians that if they would go into deficit a little bit more for a couple of years, they would regain all that money back that they would go into. And there's many areas they can put people back to work. This is going to be a consumer-led recovery. It's not going to be anything other than that.
Back to Mr. Mulroney, of course. You must give him credit for hiring some really expert advice in the PCO. People like Dalton Camp at $100,000 a year. Now, did that not make him very popular in certain circles?
I think he has created a thunderstorm in his own house, and he will suffer from that. You don't bring somebody out and make them a deputy minister making that kind of money just to find ways and means to make him popular again to the people of Canada. It's not going to work that way.
Well, rate Mulroney as Prime Minister for me. Rate him.
Rate him?
Last night, Louis Laberge gave him a very rude Italian sign about what the Labour movement was going to do to him. How would you rate Prime Minister Mulroney's performance after 2 years in office?
Well, I think that his performance has been devastating to this country. I think he has not lived up to any of the things that he committed himself to. The only thing he's living up to, and now it's falling badly behind, is something he did not campaign on, and that was the free trade situation. He did not campaign on that. He did not go to the Canadian people. He, in fact, was against it when he was running to become Prime Minister during his own parochial elections. And I think now that he's saying, aha, you know, if this happens, then I'll take it to the people. Well, take it to the people, Mr. Mulroney, and we'll see what happens.
My thanks to Shirley Carr of the Canadian Labour Congress.
It's been great to talk to you, Jack.
Thanks, Shirley. Be back after the break.
Take care.
Thanks, Rob. Talk tonight. I want you to go on and on and on and on.
I'll try.
To fill.
I'll let you get a word in edgewise, Jack.
Yeah. How old are you, 50?
56.
I'm 68, for fuck's sake. I don't often apologize, but I must apologize tonight to Claude Richmond, the Minister of Tourism. I had him set up for an interview on the microwave from Victoria on his financial details about Expo. But after I saw the material and saw the clips of the press conference, I decided that all I would have done was shout at him, what is the deficit at Expo? And we won't get that until long after the provincial election, shortly coming up, is over. Apologies, Claude. We'll do you again when you've got something meaty to talk about. Meanwhile, in its place, I have an Americano. And the way we feel about Americanos these days, I may hit him over the head with a baseball bat. Welcome to the Webster Show, sir. It is Myron Kandel, former financial editor of the New York Times. Used to work for that dreadful man Rupert Murdoch in the Post.
New York Post.
And you appear him occasionally on an unknown network called CNN, the cable news network. And he's going to blow our minds by telling us that capitalism has come to its end in the stock markets of the United States. You're a financial expert. Tell me, what the devil's happening? Because I wouldn't put a nickel in the market these days.
Okay, Jack, if you weren't in the market over the last year, you missed a run-up on the Dow Jones Industrial Average of 600 points. The market went up nearly 50%. Last week was disaster. Last Thursday and Friday, the Dow lost 120 points in 2 days. Record drops, record volume. It lost 6% of its value from the high point that was reached about 3 weeks ago. Still, nearly 500 points ahead of where it was a year ago at this time.
So the white boys, the smart boys that went into the market a year ago before it took the 600-point rise haven't really suffered at all.
Not at all. Well, yes, they have. I'm sorry. Of course, that was a big beating they took last week, but it doesn't mean the end of the world, doesn't mean the end of the market, it doesn't mean a 1929.
Come on now, I want you to be more depressing than that. Stock markets all around the world went to hell in a handbasket last week, didn't it?
Absolutely.
It does not mean the end of the world.
No, it doesn't. Now, look, I'm not an apologist for the American stock market.
That's what I'm trying to make
I cover it as Jack, I cover it as a journalist, but a lot of people got very upset. They were talking about depression, recession, crash. That's not what happened. What happened is we had a market that was too high. A lot of people were waiting for it to go back down, and when it finally did go back down, it did so at such an extreme rate, 86 points in 1 day, that it got a lot of people nervous.
But there must have been a specific cause that caused it to collapse last Thursday, the number of points it did go down. I mean, not everybody sitting looking at their little portfolio thought, oh, this is the day I'm going to sell. What was the key?
Well, the key, Jack, is really there was a big decline in the bond market for the previous 2 weeks. That should have been the signal. If people were a lot smarter than they were and they realized what was happening, they could have gotten out early, as indeed I'm sure some people did. The bond market was going down. Very strange reason. If we think about it, back in the States, the week before Labor Day, people were talking about the danger of another recession. The economy in the U.S. was slowing. We might run into a recession. And the week after Labor Day, they suddenly began seeing some better economic reports. And they said, wait a minute, no recession. The economy is going to boom. And you know what that means? More inflation. And so they really changed their tune from one week to the next. And these worries about more inflation meant that interest rates were not going to go down any longer. The stock market likes lower interest rates. When that feeling got around that interest rates were heading up, not down, a lot of people decided at the same time to sell.
Yeah, but nowadays it's not the individual guy who buys and sells. Surely the American stock market is programmed to death, computerized to death. And surely if some guru somewhere, I'm not talking about, what was the name of that guy who used to...
Joe Granville.
Not talking about the Joe Granvilles. It's only the little confused people that follow Joe, isn't it? But what happens with a big computerized thing, if the pension fund computer says, there is a danger of a so-and-so, so-and-so, in go the computers, out go the pension funds.
No, but it really doesn't work that way.
Is that what happened?
Jack, the computer works in a different way. We have these option markets. We have futures markets where they sell contracts on stock indexes. Well, the computer says at a certain point, buy the index, buy the future, and sell the stock. And that's what, and you can make a little edge. Now, these guys are dealing in millions and tens of millions of dollars. A little edge could be 1/4 of a point. You magnify it in those terms, it's big money. What happens is the word was buy the option, buy the futures, sell the stock. Everybody sold the stock all at once, and that triggered a whole wave of selling programs. Now, you're absolutely...
That could happen again, couldn't it?
It could absolutely happen again. Some people that I interviewed on Cable News Network said we could have, this was a few months ago, we could have a 100-point drop in the Dow. And some of our viewers said, wait a minute, what kind of crazy talk is that? 100 points, that was incredible. We had close to it last week, 86 points. These computerized programs are distorting the market, which means the little guy can get burned and burn big if he tries to play with the big boys at their own game.
Don't play with the big boys. Play in your own little exchange, even if you don't trust that exchange that much. No local references intended, right? Now, but what about the Hunt brothers? What about that kind of, what about the commodity market? I've known a lot of people in this town who've been wiped out by stupidly playing with the commodity market. Is it just as jumpy and shifty as it ever was?
Well, the commodity market is no place for a small investor who's looking to make a quick killing. He'll get killed, that's for sure, himself. The commodity market is dominated by the big boys. There are people that use the commodities markets very intelligently to hedge their own commodities that they use in their businesses and whatever. There are speculators that...
Because they know what's going to happen and what they use in their business.
Yes, and they're protecting themselves against big drops in the commodities that they need, or big rises.
A question not really on the topic. I always have the feeling that the little guy in the market, whether he buys a penny stock or a $10 stock, is going to get ripped off by the guy with insider knowledge anyway. Is that not a big danger in any market anywhere?
Absolutely, and we're seeing that being uncovered in the States, right? We've had the biggest insider cases ever, the Dennis Levine case and others. That's a danger. However, the little investor picking a good stock and staying with it, not getting whipsawed by the computerized programs, over the long run, those will wash out. And a good stock will go up if it's a good stock and if he's not looking to make a killing overnight.
But that's all very well for the people interested in the market. The fact remains is that the American economy is extraordinarily fragile, losing out to Japanese, worried about world trade, being hammered by the Europeans. And now your American market is now subsidizing its grain exports to ruin Canadian grain. What about the state of your economy?
Okay, I can't, Jack, I'm not going to duck the issue on trade, but that's not my expertise. The American economy has got some problems. Obviously, it's in a very sluggish state. It's not showing the growth that the Reagan administration, for example, said it was going to show. It's certainly sluggish at best. Now, there are some people that think the lower interest rates, the Federal Reserve has cut the discount rate 4 times already this year, talking about a fifth cut, get interest rates down again. They're now moving up lately. Will give the economy a shot in the arm and get it back on track. We're not seeing it yet.
One question of free trade. In your fairly high-level line of business, do you ever hear any mention or talk or concern about the troubles financially and all the borrowings we have in the States, or the trade war we have now between Canada and the States, or is that invisible at your level?
Jack,
honest answer.
This is a subject that is not covered adequately by the American press.
Do you even know that we're your best customer? Do you know that?
I think those of us that know a little bit about the economy know it, but I think not enough people in the American government or in Congress, they're interested in protecting their own industries. We're seeing too much of that.
Myron Kandel, CNN. How many times a day are you on the air?
6.
For how long each time?
Well, 3-4 minutes every hour on the half hour in the afternoon.
On the half hour? I'm mimicking your accent. I'm going to take phone calls to you stock market touts. No, stock market players. Try Myron with a couple of questions on the big money stuff. It's beyond me. I have a few more questions to ask, but help me with phone calls after the break. The economy, is it basically healthy in the United States? You've got freedom to starve down there, of course. You don't have the social safety nets or the socialized medicine we have, right?
Jack, the economy is not doing very well. There is some feeling it'll pick up in the last quarter of this year, but it's certainly at a slow rate, and it's nowhere near where anyone would like it to be.
We won't even talk to you about the lumber industry or what's happening to British Columbia. The fact remains is, if I were in the States today, 28.5% flat tax coming in, right? Good?
Well, I think it's going to get passed, although Congress is beginning to have some second thoughts. I think we'll get a tax bill. In total, I think it's a positive thing, but it's not an unmixed blessing.
Myron Kandel is speaking on the Bayshore in Main Ballroom tomorrow night, 7:30. That's the plug for what's his name. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I just have a comment to make to Mr. Kandel.
Right.
Hello, Mr. Kandel.
Yes, I'm here.
My family and I always enjoy you on CNN and your comments.
Well, that's nice of you to say.
Always enjoy you.
Thank you, ma'am. Should go on forever plugging you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yep.
Would you please explain the commodities market, as many people do not understand it? We do not have one here in Vancouver. They do in Winnipeg. They do across the border.
We used to have a bit of a one here, but a lot of people got into so much trouble. Right.
Well,
commodities market.
Oh, boy. That's. Can we spend the next hour on that, Jack?
25 seconds.
Okay. It's basically a futures market where you sell contracts in advance. The basic commodities, agricultural and industrial commodities. There's no place for the small investor to put his money.
It's where I predict what the future price of hog sides will be, right? And I can hedge against it, but I've got to pay the money if I don't reach my point. Correct. Next one. I can't see you. Victoria. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, I just wanted to plug Myron again. I do listen to the CNN.
Oh.
Enjoy the show very much. And I just had a quick question for Myron as far as tomorrow. We have a triple expiry date on some options and a few other things. I'm just wondering what his thoughts are as far as tomorrow and the market is concerned.
Well, that's Friday.
That's right.
That's Friday.
Correct, yes.
And we do have what's called the triple witching hour. That's the 4 times a year, once each quarter, where the options index, the futures contracts, and the stock options all expire the same day. That's the reason for the triple witching hour. There's some feeling is that the big drop last week was in anticipation of that triple witching hour, that we will not see as much activity this time around because it's already happened.
Okay. Now you know what the triple witching hour is. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes?
If, as you say, the stock market is a precarious place for small fish like myself, I've been told recently that I can play like a big fish and buy mutual funds or industrial growth funds Is that true? Can I safely rely on these companies who will take my money and do all the thinking for me and take all the chances for me, and in the long run reap the benefits? Is that true?
Okay, I think mutual funds have grown tremendously in the last few years, particularly as people have gotten burned in the market themselves. What you're doing is giving your money to professional managers who put it in a fund with a lot of other people's money. Presumably, they're smarter than the individuals are.
Presumably, they won't flee to the Bahamas.
Oh, no, no, no. Good mutual funds have the good companies have a record. You should check and look at their record and see that they're not brand new, the new guys on the block. What kind of record do they have? What kind of funds do they have? I don't think you have to worry about a good mutual fund.
Is it not a fact, said Webster, with very little knowledge, that the best buy in mutual funds today are in the Japanese mutual funds?
I would think maybe 6 months ago, before the yen strengthened so much against the dollar, the Japanese economy, Jack, is not doing as well as it was. There's even a mini recession going on there.
That's good news for you and bad news for us on the coal, etc., isn't it? Steel plants.
There are two sides to every coin.
I want our side to win. Go ahead, please.
Mike, welcome to Canada. Who do you think are the top 3 investment letter writers?
Oh, well, now you got me. We have most of them at one time or another on our network, CNN. There are a number of good market letters. There are probably too many writers. You really have to pick out the one that suits your investment style and who has proven to be pretty good over the recent past.
You sound like a candidate for Prime Minister of Canada. You're just going round that question. Name one.
Well, okay, I'll tell you. One is Stan Weinstein, the professional tape reader based in Florida, has a very good record, helped call this market drop last week.
Stan Weinstein. See? Hate people that evade simple questions. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Kandel, I was just wondering if you could tell me your thoughts on where the Dow's going over the next 4 years and what you figure that it's going to hit before it starts to drop.
Well, I think long term we're going to see 2,000 Dow by the end of this year. We're going to see 3,000 on the Dow by the end of this decade. I think we're going to see, this big bull market that started in August of 1982 is still intact after this correction has run its course. Right now, I think we'll see prices go down somewhat more and then come back by the end of the year.
Thank you. That's a good answer. 3,000 by the end of the decade. Is that real or just... Most of it's done by paper shufflers, isn't it? No. Look at all this green mail racket there is on both sides of the border. The phony takeovers, push up the price, buy out and walk away. Employees laid off. I can think of one big American concern that did that. It's brutal and cold-blooded, isn't it?
Jack, you're partly right. They're not phony takeovers, though. In those cases, we've seen the biggest takeovers in history take place. I think you're right in paying some attention to the human toll. These companies laying off, firing people that have been there for...
Because of the expense of the takeover.
Partly that. And some people have questioned whether there's a real economic benefit from many of those takeovers.
But that's a free enterprise by which you live and die, right?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello?
Yes, yes.
Last week we had record days on New York. I was wondering how much of that volume do you think is related to program selling?
I think last week a big chunk of it was, and it really distorted the market. I think we'll see it, as I indicated earlier, wash out a bit. The market was ready to go down. It all happened at once. I do think we'll see a higher market by the end of this year.
Thank you. What's the next one? Go ahead, please.
Hello, Myron?
Yes.
When is gold going to top $1,000 an ounce?
You know, I said to Jack at the beginning of the program, don't ask me anything about gold. I really am not a gold bug or a gold follower. I got to pass on that question.
Okay, pass the gold to me. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Hello, Jack.
Yep.
What do you do with all your big salary if you don't play the stock market?
Mind your own business. If you've got a question, ask it. If you haven't, go away. What's he expect me to tell him? I can't read there. Go ahead from Penticton.
Yes, I've played the market with $250 and I've made a $50 profit. I did pretty well. Do you see any future in a commodities mutual market?
As I said, I really think that's a speculative market that small investors should stay away from.
Thank you. Go ahead, please. You're getting remarkably good calls. See how...
Mr. Kandel?
Yep.
I understand that the recent unprecedented rise in the American market was caused partly by a new manipulative ploy by big money. And I really don't understand what they were doing. Can you shed a little light on it for me, please?
Well, I really think I mentioned it earlier, this program trading that kicks off when there's an imbalance between the futures and the option and the underlying stocks. It really isn't a ripoff. The big guys get hurt as much as the smaller ones. It's a mechanism in the market that I think is distorting the overall market, and that's one of the reasons the small investor has to be extra careful these days.
Myron, you've been a gem. It's nice to get somebody whose leg I can pull occasionally. He's speaking at the Bayshore Inn tomorrow night, main ballroom. Tonight was free. Tomorrow night you got to pay a few bucks to see him, if you think he's worth it. If you don't go. I'll be back after the break.
Do you want to use the television, Jack?
I don't know.
He doesn't know if he'll use it or not.
Good of you to come out.
No problem. I'm glad you sent your man because I wouldn't have made it. No way.
That makes it a lot easier. I have an unusual guest tonight. He's not unusual. He's Gordon Fisher. He's the managing editor of the Vancouver Sun. And of course, I interviewed Mulroney on Sunday, didn't ask him about drugs and probably missed the story. Then I see in the Sun the following story. Page 1 this was. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney said Monday he's in favor of the mandatory testing of individuals for drug use. On the Globe and Mail the next day, from Brandon, Manitoba, the Prime Minister contradicted the Vancouver Sun. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney has denied. He told a Vancouver newspaper he favors mandatory testing of individuals for drug use. I said no such thing, Mr. Mulroney said. How could you be so wrong, said Webster provocatively.
We aren't wrong, Jack. We're right.
Can you prove your case to me?
I can prove my case if you give me time to read all the transcripts, which I can't do, but I can tell you that I was there, Jack. I listened to the man. The man is moving on drug testing, at least in a preliminary sense.
He said, going back to your story, Prime Minister Mulroney said Monday he's in favor of the mandatory testing of individuals for drug use, and then you go on, the mandatory testing would be part of a package he wants to put together to combat the growing abuse of drugs in Canada.
Quite right.
You stand by that?
Indeed I do.
Even if I were to agree with you, is not your background fill-up from the lengthy press conference or session you had with him a little bit on the thin side?
Do you really think so?
Well, I'm asking you about that.
No, well, I don't think so.
Because you said his initiative would include unique ways of stopping the demand here in Canada. Did at any time he actually say, I, Brian Mulroney, am in favor of the mandatory testing of individuals for drug use?
No, he did not.
He said, if perhaps you could read this to me in the transcript used. In the first story he said, he said, asked if he approved of the compulsory testing of individuals, he replied, I am not offended by the notion personally. I am not offended by the notion of a test. Other people are. Asked if he would implement some kind of testing if the charter allowed him to. What did Mulroney say?
Mulroney replied in the affirmative, and I asked the question, and I was looking at him when he answered. Brian Mulroney said, yeah, and passed on.
That's quite strong. You asked the question yourself.
Yes, I did.
And you said to him, would you implement, what you actually said to him was, that to me, he said, we are looking at the charter in regard to an entire program. The Sun, that was you. That to me tells me that you do have it in your mind somewhere, the thought of actually implementing some kind of testing if you can do it. And he said?
He gestured, Jack. He said, He said, yeah. I don't have the tape in front of me. I've listened to the tape. What he now says, what I hear on the tape is indistinct, and the Prime Minister's office is using that. But I was there, I looked at him, I'm a reporter, I know he replied in the affirmative.
Well, that impresses me. You asked the question, you got the answer, and they looked at you and said,
Right.
Or yeah, or something
Right.
like that.
Quite
but
right.
The tape is not very clear.
No, our tape is not very clear. There's a lot of byplay, there's a lot of back and forth, Other people in the room heard the same thing, including the reporter who wrote the story, who's a very, very good reporter.
Mark Hume.
Mark Hume.
Mind you, if I were on the other side of the fence, which I'm not necessarily with you, because I've gone through the agonies of the damned interviewing Mulroney in trying to get him to answer questions.
Right.
The definition of the word and in Webster's dictionary is an interjection used to indicate, what's that word, affirmation or agreement or gratification.
And that's the way I take it.
That's the way you take it. And you have no apologies to make whatsoever.
None whatsoever. In fact, I have more faith in the story today than I did yesterday, and I had a lot of faith in the story yesterday.
Because you did quote him at length in the first story when he, much to everyone's surprise, used very strong language about drugs. Why do you think he threw drugs in at all in that Sunday afternoon speech in Vancouver on which you based your questions?
I think that there may be any number of reasons. You can be cynical and say that he's trying to take our attention from the real news of the day. Tomorrow they're going to tell us about the deficit. Maybe he feels passionately and strongly about drugs because it is a problem.
Yeah, and apparently he heard the Sunday morning broadcast or something and said his initiative, he talked about an initiative, this is with you, involving prosecution penalties, the corruption of our children, people getting off with a slap on the wrist. I was wondering if he was going to volunteer for drug tests like Reagan did.
He has today said that he would, or he's come close to it. I was listening to him on the radio on the way out, and he's now telling us that he was not, he was speaking as a citizen of Canada when he was speaking to us, that he was speaking personally. Well, we invited the Prime Minister of Canada to our thing, and that's who we were talking to.
You're telling me he's backtracking on his initial denial on Brandon, Manitoba?
I believe he's backtracking. I believe he's filling a lot of water right now and trying to find a way and a ground that he's comfortable with.
In other words, you're now interpreting what he's saying about other people looking at the Charter for possible actions, and you're interpreting that he's backtracking and backfilling.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can tell you now that I know very well that people are indeed looking at the Charter. And we'll tell you about that in the Vancouver Sun tomorrow.
But you, Gordon Fisher, managing editor of the Sun, are saying that you were the man who asked him the question, would he implement some kind of testing if the Charter allowed him to? Mulroney replied, and maybe even yeah?
And maybe even yeah.
Would you have written that story without a tape recording even to back you up a bit?
I certainly would have. In fact, the more I listen to tape recordings, and I listen to this one carefully, I'm awfully thankful that we're still a profession that relies on reporters and relies on notes.
Mind you, I'm an old hand reporter, and if I'm saying to you, are you in favour of executing Jack Webster for corruption of the English language?
Not yet.
And you said, I wouldn't know what to write down. There is some dubiety.
But if you were looking at me, Jack, and asked me the question, and I looked at you and I responded, you would know my response.
Are you in favour of executing Jack Webster? Give me a positive Yeah, I suppose so. Am I creating a storm out of nothing? No, I'm not.
Well, what you're doing, Jack, and I want to be serious for a minute, what you're doing and what a lot of other people are doing, the Prime Minister's office has seized on this one portion of a tape recording, and this is what they're using to deny a fairly substantial, a very substantial story. And it worries me that we do this. This story is a real story. It's an important story. It isn't the most important story in the world. It isn't as important as the deficit. It surprises me that he's getting exercised about it, but I don't think we should focus so much on I think there's much more to that story than that.
You're not surprised that I asked you to come out here tonight, are you?
No, I'm not.
Because here's a Sun story by Mark Hume in favour of mandatory testing. Here's a Globe and Mail story denied, he told a Vancouver newspaper. Do you think maybe he just got caught with his own particular method of not wanting to say yes or no?
I guess he did. I guess he's sounding the waters. I guess he's testing. I don't know what he's doing, Jack. I'm a bit puzzled by it all.
But there was sufficient of a body of information, one in the speech and two in your interview with your executives, that you feel that it all fell together that he was in favour of mandatory testing,
yes,
if it could be done under the Charter.
Yes, and I believe it today, after listening to him again and listening to him on the radio today and reading the Canadian press reports today, I'm even more convinced. I've talked to people in Ottawa who tell me that the story is right. I'm satisfied, more than satisfied.
I don't know whether I should nitpick you or not and say...
But you will.
Maybe you pushed it a wee bit hard.
I don't agree with you.
Because I wasn't there, and if a senior experienced reporter tells me the man said, in effect, yes, I'm inclined to accept your word over it.
Thank you.
Let's take some... You game for some telephone calls?
Absolutely.
About the Vancouver Sun. What do you like about the... What do you not like about... No. On this topic.
No, that's fine.
The Mulroney syndrome, after the break. Gordon Fisher's managing editor of the Vancouver Sun, and he's the guy whose story, his paper story, was denied by Prime Minister Mulroney the other day. Go ahead, please, from Winfield.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Mr. Fisher, very refreshing to hear you. You come across as a very honest man. I tend to believe what you say.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much. That's a good start for you.
Indeed.
Go ahead from Victoria. Hello.
You're talking Kamloops, not Victoria. Are you daft?
I'm sorry, no, that's what I was told. Go ahead from Kamloops.
Yes, it's a pleasure to see a gentleman from the Vancouver Sun because it's one of the best newspapers I've ever read. Now, if I have my choice between Mr. Mulroney's words and Mr. Fisher's words, I'll take Mr. Fisher's words.
Oh, this is going very well.
Thank you very much. Next one.
Mr. Fisher, you stated in your paper mandatory. That was not what the Prime Minister or, as a citizen, Mr. Mulroney stated. Now, mandatory is the wrong word to use there entirely. Also, you sort of sloughed by the fact that drugs are not that important as other things. They are extremely important to our country. We are having more difficulty each day, and that was the only thing I wished to say. I'm on Mr. Mulroney's side on this.
Fine. The only thing I can say, Jack, is I didn't mean to downplay the importance of the drug problem. I thought it was the bun fight I was referring to.
Oh, I see. Maybe she's got a point there. Mandatory testing. That's what you asked him.
We asked him, I think the word we used was compulsory.
That's right, use the word compulsory somewhere in the material. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr.
Fisher.
Mulroney appeared to be responding to a statement by your guest as to what it told him. It really wasn't framed as a question.
Yeah, the actual words were, that to me tells me that you do have it in your mind somewhere, the thought of actually implementing some kind of testing if you can do it. It was a statement.
That was a statement, but don't forget that this is part of a larger interview and that if you go up a little higher in it, you'll find a direct question in which he is asked if he favors compulsory testing, similar to the thing that Ronald Reagan is planning to introduce. He responded to that question, and the question flew from there, so it's in context.
When he was asked about that, he said, but I'm not offended by the notion, personally. I am not offended by the notion of a test. Other people are, and we're examining the implications, the chartered implications of that.
He uses the word personally there, of course.
Well,
yeah.
He is the Prime Minister. He was talking to us as the Prime Minister, and I'm satisfied that he was talking as the Prime Minister.
I think with that qualification, the word personally, you could take it either way.
You mean if you put Prime Minister Brian Mulroney said Monday he's personally in favour of the mandatory testing of individuals for drug use?
That's right.
Which is what we said.
Rather than speaking on behalf of the government.
Good, thank you. Go ahead, please.
My concern is the general concern of the Sun newspaper and what it represents in our community. I think the Sun newspaper has some excellent people working for it, but it's not well directed towards satisfying our interest in our community as far as social questions are concerned.
What's wrong with it?
Well, very little space is given to possible solutions of our social problems in Vancouver, and I'd like to see the newspaper report more than just the problems. I'd like to see the newspaper try to elicit responses to some of these problems.
You mean on what, for instance? On drugs?
On drugs, on
daycare?
Fair or whatever.
On social welfare problems?
Yes.
More in-depth reporting about the problems of the underprivileged?
Yes, the underprivileged and even the privileged have enormous problems in our society, and I think that the paper should serve more as a forum.
Okay, sir. I've heard you. We'll think about it.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Fisher.
Yeah. Right. Go ahead.
Hello?
That's you. Go ahead.
Okay. At the risk of offending Jack, who I know is adverse to using the role of a devil's advocate, it just occurred to me that on a bad tape, or sound quite a bit alike, and so do yeah and nah.
Well, if I said that's no. If I say it could be yes.
Yeah, but on a bad tape.
Well,
but we're not relying on the tape, sir. We're relying on the instincts, on the reporting skills of the people that were at the meeting. That's what we rely on. We rely on the skills of professionals who look at people and talk to them and then report what we saw and what we heard.
Well, then I misunderstood
the tape is part of it.
That appears to have been placed on the tape from the program today.
The reliance on the tape, I think, is generated by the Prime Minister's office, not by us.
I can see. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Fisher, I had the other Vancouver newspaper delivered for 22 years. In the days when the Sun seemed to be more of a sensational type paper when Jack Webster wrote for it. And I was receiving 4 newspapers pretty well each day. Now we don't subscribe to any, but when I pick up a newspaper, it's the Vancouver Sun. And what I particularly enjoy are some of those excellent articles by local freelance writers who cover a lot of the local social scene. When I say social, you know what I mean.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Fisher, I'm
Yes, sir.
inclined to agree with you. I believe you. Mr. Mulroney has been filling us full of bull for the last 2 years, and I'm glad to see somebody stand up for honest journalism.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Fisher, I agree with you. I think that, and the last gentleman too, that Mr. Mulroney has filled us with bull, told us lies, has continued to give his patronage out to everybody. He's just nothing but a full-fledged liar and suck the people
Oh,
in.
no. Come on. Don't do that. No need. I don't mind you criticizing the Prime Minister, but you don't need to go hog wild. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yeah.
I think it was mentioned about 3 calls before, but actually there is quite a similarity between if that's supposed to mean yes, and which I think would mean no. And it would. I think that's what he's going to hide behind. But what about Trudeau's fuddle-duddle? You know.
Well, there was nothing indistinct about what Trudeau said in the way of fuddle-duddle. What do you call that thing when you disguise a word with another word? There's an English. Steve.
But anyway, I think that's what he's going to hide behind. Why didn't he just say yes or no?
Because that's not the way he was talking, I guess. You'd have to ask the Prime Minister that.
Mind you, if it had been a television interview and I'd asked him and they said, I might well have said to him, eh? So he could give me yes or no. From Kelowna, go ahead, please.
Hi, Mr. Webster. I don't want to put an extra crook in your shillelagh, my man. But however, you're not on at 5 p.m. precisely. You're on at 4:59. Check your clock.
Wish these smart alecks would mind their own business. 5 p.m. is a little bit of hyperbole, but I'm not about to change it because the link brings it in at 4:59. Gordon Fisher, I don't know if this story will now die. One day wonder. What do you think?
I think it'll go on for a wee while, maybe towards the end of the week. But
you're going to hammer it again tomorrow?
Oh, we're going to give it another shot.
My thanks to Gordon Fisher, managing editor of the Vancouver Sun, and I'll be back after the break. The Retail Clerks Union in Victoria have been threatened with the loss of a great number of jobs, and I've been following that story. And tomorrow night, I'm going to have Brian Denton of the Retail Clerks to tell me their side of the story. Hopefully, we'll have the employer side on soon, too. But the gem tomorrow night is the darling of the Beeb, the BBC. The chess whiz, our Nathan Davinsky, captured Britain. Tomorrow night at 5 p.m. precisely. Stay tuned for the news.